Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. All eyes are on the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks as tensions build. Joining us now is David Wurmser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former Senior Advisor to Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and Strategic Affairs. David, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have you with us. Now, President Trump today giving reporters his thoughts on the latest round of talks. Let's actually watch that now.
We're not happy with the negotiation. They just don't want to. They don't want to say the key words, we're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They have to say, we're not going to have a nuclear weapon. And they just can't quite get there. They want to enrich.
How are you reading this and the chances of a negotiated end?
Well, I think that yesterday, President Trump was expecting a very serious response from Iran that goes most of the way to what's being demanded, and it didn't arrive. So he's upset and disappointed, and he believes that the negotiations are now being intentionally dragged out. And he also realizes that this was only the first part, which is the nuclear part, and then there's the missiles and so forth. So while I think he still gives Iran a little bit of a window over the next few hours, maybe days, to capitulate essentially and give in to the demands, but I believe he's more or less now looking as if he realizes the diplomatic track is coming to an end.
When it comes to tensions in the region, China telling its citizens in Iran to evacuate as soon as possible, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio just designating Iran as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, ending the announcement with, quote, "No American should travel to Iran for any reason. We reiterate our call for Americans who are currently in Iran to leave immediately." How seriously should we read into this? Is this more for safety or a serious indicator of upcoming strikes?
Well, it's both a serious indicator of upcoming strikes and also for safety, because Iran has a very long history of taking hostages. Obviously, in 1979, it took our embassy hostage, but all along it's held hostages and then used them as bargaining chips. Hamas did this with Israel. It learned it from Iran. Iran really has made it a key principle of its foreign policy is to barter hostages for concessions. So the fear that Americans will be taken hostage in Iran, Iranian Americans visiting their family and so forth, is very real and very high.
In terms of Iran's allies, several reports from National Interest, Chatham House, etc., saying while China doesn't support Iran militarily, it sees Iran as a long game, helping flood the nation with dual-use technology and often wielding the veto vote at the United Nations. What are China's interests here? How should we understand this partnership?
Well, first and foremost, I think China's interest is to make sure that what happens in Iran doesn't have ripples that spread to Beijing. Specifically, this idea of freedom is infectious, and if Iran, the regime falls and there's a flourishing of freedom in Tehran, this can have ripple effect everywhere, Cuba, etc., that could reach to Beijing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it has a deep interest in just making the United States and its key allies fail. So while it has no real force projection capability in Iran to counter America's, and certainly the Israeli force projection in the region, it can give Iran technologies that trip up the United States and Israel, and it's apparently doing so in air defense, perhaps anti-drone technology, and some other issues perhaps as well. And then the third thing is exactly that. They know that Iran will now face the most advanced Western equipment in Israel's hands and in America's hands. And whatever it needs to learn about how we operate and how we go against the equipment in Iran could have a great deal of effect on their then adjusting their military posture and their equipment. So they have a great deal of interest in helping Iran here.
And if the U.S. were to strike Iran, what exactly would the U.S. be targeting here?
Well, I think the first thing would be to ensure that what has been reconstituted in the nuclear program, which is the buildings basically have begun to be reconstructed, would be hit and set it back to ground zero, because the nuclear program still is largely shut down. But then you have the large missile arsenal, which is actually as large as it was now on the eve of the war last summer on June 12th. And then the third thing is the proxy networks. The proxy networks have been killing Americans across the region and globally, and they've been destabilizing the region. And then the proxy networks were used extensively in January to suppress the uprising that the Iranian people had against the regime. And that leads to the fourth objective, which is to strike regime targets to help the Iranian people take over and liberate themselves. The Iranian people are essentially our ground troops at this point. Now, America may not be the only player here. It's quite possible Israel will play a major role or even the lead role in the first phase, simply because the missiles are the greatest threat to American troops and to Israeli cities. And the Israelis are very focused on the missiles. So you could see a very large Israeli strike alone or in coordination with the United States to first clear as many of the missile launchers as possible. And then you see the expansion into the other targets.
And how would Israel and the U.S. make sure this doesn't become a prolonged war?
Overwhelming force. First of all, to start hitting regime targets, to really link up with the Iranian people. My sense is that the Israelis and the United States have been working extensively with Iranians on the ground who are opposed to the regime, the Israelis very extensively since last June, and that they know who some of these leaders are who are leading the opposition uprising and so forth. So you will see them coupling with them to bring this also to the regime. But most importantly, the power of Israel and the United States can be applied to shut down and paralyze the regime, to help the Iranian people take matters into their own hands. That's how this could resolve. The other resolution is that there's such devastation to the Iranian regime that a few elements of it cry uncle and are giving up then everything that has bothered everybody, and including the proxy networks, which would threaten essentially the stability of the regime anyway, because that's how they suppress the Iranian people. So you could see a sort of a coup or something where the United States then will seize that and then run with that to try to end the war, but essentially still get exactly to where we need to get.
And David, with all these fast-moving developments, what are you watching here?
Well, obviously the skies over Iraq and Jordan and so forth, but I also would look carefully at Lebanon. The Israelis most likely will act in Lebanon to clear out the threat from Hezbollah in advance, and that actually has been happening the last few days. Last 96 hours, there was a great deal of strikes in Lebanon to shut down Hezbollah. I would also look to Hamas and to the Houthis, both of which could very well, in fact, will likely intervene with a lot of what they have left. And with the Houthis, that could be quite a bit. So you will see this be regional, not just Iran. But I don't anticipate a war that will last months. I think that the amount of force that is amassed against Iran, this is something that even last summer was only a 12-day war. We're talking about a much greater element of force now than there was last summer.
A lot at stake for sure. David Wurmser, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.